Hello there, Jose Rodriguez here. In this multi-part video, I'm going to be discussing a type of experiment that I've been playing around with for the last several months. Actually, it's been about a year. Ever since I purchased my two EPSON Pro 3800s and realizing how much ink cartridges cost, especially the OEM ones, I went ahead and switched over to refillables. And that's fine, but upon dissecting one of these empty carts, I realized that the internal components of the OEM cart is actually composed of an ink bladder. There is no air whatsoever inside the ink bladder. It's ink inside a bag attached to a valve. Now, the internal compartment where the bag lives is sealed to the outside. So with this little nozzle right here, the printer pressurizes the internal compartment, which then provides a positive pressure against the ink bag, which then feeds the ink through the exit nozzle through a set of lines, almost like a continuous ink system, to the Pro 3800 head. And that is the most ideal method of running one of these, either the 3800 or the 3880. Now, I had purchased some empty carts. By empty, I mean carts that have been declared as empty. And the EPSON chip always overestimates the actual content of ink, because the last thing it wants to do is to end up with a fully empty cart and air introduced into the lines. So basically what happens is this: there's up to 8 to maybe as high as 13 ml of ink still left. And considering the fact that this comes with, although they claim is 80 ml, is more like 70. So you can see that that's quite a high percentage of leftover ink. So if the deal is right, I'll purchase maybe 30, 40, 50 empties and extract the ink out of these, and then utilize that OEM ink on my R2400, which I have refillables for. And I end up working with OEM ink on convenient refillables. I get the quality that I'm looking for, plus I get the ink extremely cheap, because these cards basically are going to be thrown out. And as a secondary benefit, I get to remove the chip, which in most cases, depending on the refillable system that you are using, they are totally usable. Often you hear about, if you let the chip go below 15%, they will not be able to be reused on a refillable system, which utilizes a secondary controller chip and rides on top of the original. In this case, I have found that so far all of the chips that I have used, that I have actually cannibalized from these so-called empty carts, have worked. Anyway, so now ideally, wouldn't we just love to be able to re-inject either third-party inks into the ink bladder? And there are, although they're difficult to find, I located a resetter that will actually reset the chip. Now, that particular resetter cannot reset the chip if it's below 15%. So I have currently a set of carts that I removed from my 3800 before I installed the refillables on it, that were at least above 40, all of them. So I still have quite a bit of ink in them. Now, in case you were wondering why bother going through all this trouble and use third-party inks, well, I also have been able to locate large 210 ml cards that are meant for large format EPSON printers, and I get these occasionally through eBay. It depends on the alignment of the planets and the position of the stars, if you can find a good deal. and quite often it's still within expiration date, which really means nothing. It just means that, you know, they shouldn't be sold beyond that date, but they're still perfectly usable. So I have probably a pint each of each color of the K3 ink line, including some equal amounts of vivid magenta and vivid light magenta for my 2880, my EPSON R2880, which uses the vivid magenta ink. Okay, so fine. So we would then fill up a syringe, push it in, and inject ink. Well, I first thought that would be possible because when I received my first batch of 110 ml K3 carts for the 4800, I was able to do that. I was able to not only pull ink out, but also push it back in if I felt like it. So it was a two-way valve. Now, those carts did not have the pressurization port located here, as you see. You can see that there's a little bit of ink. This is an empty tank that I drew out as much ink as I could, and I harvested it. Now, those carts do not have this port here, so they're not pressurized. And I'm wondering, in my always trying to push the envelope, I'm wondering whether that has anything to do with the fact that those carts were a two-way access. In other words, I could push ink in and I could pull ink out, whereas these that are pressurized do not offer that option. Now, so then later on I received some 220 ml carts also for the 4800, and those did not have the pressurizing pin, but they were housed with a different valve. In fact, one just like these. This is only a one-way valve. You can only pull ink out. You cannot push ink in. Okay, here I have a cart for the 4880. It is a vivid magenta, light magenta cart. And you can see the number T6056. This is for a different printer, T6026. But they're both 110 ml. The difference between the two is the port. This is a one-way port. This is a two-way port. I can actually push ink back into this one. I cannot push ink into this one here. And this one has a pressurization port. This one does not. So I'm wondering whether the fact that whenever a cart is pressurized, or the pressurized type, do they really need a one-way valve? Does the one-way valve have any functionality whatsoever with the fact that these carts have to be maintained at a specific positive pressure against the ink bag, whereas these work basically by suction created by some sort of internal pump within the printer? Please excuse the rumble you hear. That's my air conditioner. I am in my shop right now, and it just kicked in. Anyway, so as you can see, my question is, if I could find a way to refill these, will I be interfering with the pressurization? In other words, if I figure out a way to allow me to re-inject ink in other words, bypass or breach the internal seal that prevents liquid from being pushed back into the bladder, will that have anything to do with the pressurization? So first thing we have to do is we have to dissect the unit. Basically remove the nozzle. And the exit nozzle components are actually quite simple, and once you see it, you'll realize how simple the whole thing is. So let me go ahead and begin. Okay, the end component is basically a little cap. As you can see right here, it is held together with the rest of the valve by 4 little clips. Now, you need to be careful, because if you beat up or damage those little clips, you may not be able to reinsert the little cover back on here. So we want to very carefully work it loose like this. The cap is right here. The little tabs, I should say, are right there. Now, there we go. So we have one loose, and I'll work on the next one, and the third one. I hope you can see what I'm doing here. I don't want it to fly off when I get them all loosened up. So I'm going to hold it with my finger. Now this process, I've done it once on a empty yellow cart, and I didn't get a chance to actually test it on the printer because I don't have the resetter yet, and that's on its way from China. So that will be the ultimate test. I'm going to test it against a set of OEM carts already pre-installed in one of my 3800s. Now here it is, and I'll just go ahead and pry it completely off. It's totally loose, it's just caught a little bit. And again, the idea is not to damage this at all. I'll take a close-up of this and show you what it looks like. Okay, and there's the underside of it. You can see that it's just a simple little cap with 4 little latches on it. And I'll flip it right side up. It's upside down right now. And that's the part that would be presented to the printer when you insert the cart. Okay, so I'll put this aside and we'll get to dissect the valve further. Okay, so we have the outer ring that locks everything together, and now for one of the most delicate parts of the operation, and that is to remove the rubber seal. This is what actually seals around the post inside the 3800 or 3880. Okay, so let's go ahead and begin. I'm going to insert it right around the edge. I'm going to try to pry it off like so. And again, you have to be careful. You don't want to damage it. It's a very good rubber material, but you can still damage it. And also be careful, because right directly behind it is the plunger. This is what actually seals your cart against this little tiny opening here. You see that little opening? I don't know if you can see that. The little opening on that little rubber diaphragm we just took out. This Teflon cylinder seals against that hole. So when you remove a card from the printer to, say, agitate the pigment every month or so, this pushes back against that rubber seal and prevents ink from coming out. Okay, so now the next step is to remove the plunger. Okay, now with some tweezers or forceps, I'm going to go ahead and grab that little cylinder and put it down on a safe surface where it will not roll off. Now I'm also going to reach inside with something pointy, say this little screwdriver for instance, and attempt to pull out the spring. And again, we do not want to lose that. And here's the spring. Now remember the plunger, and I'll show you that now. The plunger has a rounded bottom to it, rounded. And the part that presses against that seal that I showed you earlier is flat. So remember that when you reinstall it. So now is a good time to go ahead and wash all of these components and get ready to perform the next operation. Okay, before I come back, I want to show you again the components. This is the outer ring that holds everything together. This is the seal. This is the actual seal that prevents ink from leaking out when you remove a cart, and actually seals against the ink post in the printer. This is the piston or rod that seals against this rubber seal, prevents ink from pouring out when you remove a cart. This is the spring that keeps this operational, so that it is as soon as you pull the cart out of the printer, it pushes this flat portion against this underside little ring. It's a little tiny ring, and it effectively seals perfectly against it. Now when we remove a cart, of course the carts are automatically depressurized, so there's not going to be any kind of problem with ink still being under pressure. It's very difficult to see, but that's the internal view of the valve. It's actually quite a simple component. There is a little, like a little membrane at the very end that acts as a such as an air pump or a water pump, or when you're pull the piston back, it allows water to come in, but when you push the piston forward, that little flapper seals. Okay, it's not as floppy as a little rubber flapper. It's actually more robust than that. It's hard to describe because unless you cut a valve down the middle in half, you won't be able to really see what it is. But there is an area there that if I actually cut a little hole with either a needle or a very, very, very small diameter drill bit on a handheld little finger drilling device like a pin vise, you could drill a little minute hole that should be located anywhere lateral to that central position of that valve. That way nothing will interfere, the spring will be able to still operate, and ink can be pressurized, ink can come out. When you pull the cart out, ink will not come out because the spring will push that piston against the valve and you're good to go. But the magical part about this is that I'll be able to push ink in, and the ink will bypass the whole system and go into that little hole. That little hole should not have anything to do with anything about this cart's operation during printing. Hopefully that's the case. I had some preliminary good results, but I haven't really done long-term testing. So let me go ahead and wash these components out and come back. Okay, if you were able to look inside the opening, you would see something similar to this little sketch I made. Basically a round opening and a cross-like little cross member. What I'm going to do is drill a hole into any one of these. Now, this is where it gets a little dangerous, because you definitely do not want to puncture your internal ink bag. That would be fatal to this experiment and would render the whole thing unusable. Okay, so if you are looking directly down, you will see this. So what you need to do, I have a little handheld chuck here with a very small diameter. This is a 1/64 of an inch diameter drill. I'm going to insert it carefully, and I'm going to look for this particular one here, the one on the 2 o'clock, if you were looking at it as a clock. and I can feel it that it went in there. And now I'm going to go ahead and very carefully rotate my drill, applying slight downward pressure. The last time I did this, I actually used my machining drill press. It has a very sensitive quill mechanism, so I was able to create that little hole without a problem. Now, I heard recommended a hot needle. Well, the last thing I want to do is stick something glowing red inside this card, and who knows what I would then ruin. It'll take a few minutes because this is a very delicate operation. You can see I have a little chip of plastic here, so I am actually cutting. Make sure I insert it in the same hole that I have been creating here. And again, all you're doing is breaching that little one-way mechanism. And this is again all dependent on that resetter. If the resetter doesn't work, then all of this was moot. But I'm always trying to push the envelope, always trying to come up with ways to defeat. Here we go, I just went through. So now I'm just going to pull out. Make sure there aren't any slivers of material inside the valve. And now it's a matter of just reversing the steps and reinserting all of the components back in. So I'll start with the spring, then the plunger, again with the round side down. Use the tweezers if you have to. Position it so that it is in that little hole. The spring kind of keeps it from going in, but once you get it in position, like I just did here, as you can see, it's just barely standing there. So now we're going to add the rubber seal to it. Now, since I just washed these, everything is wet, so it's going to make a nice seal around it. And basically you just push it back in, like so. Make sure that everything is back in the way it's supposed to be. If you have another cart on hand, then it's easier to see if you've done something wrong. If something is not repositioned correctly. And everything looks good. Now, in reality, this is not even required, because all this does is prevent this rubber seal from being popped out if you remove a cart. But we're going to put it back in, and if need be, we can always add a little cyanoacrylate or crazy glue to keep it in position. That is, if you somehow damaged it a little bit too much when you were removing it. But it should be able to snap back in. And again, use a little screwdriver to make sure that all the tabs have popped back into position. You will know, believe me. So now we're going to go ahead. I'm going to show you an unmodified cart and the way ink cannot be pushed in, and I'm just going to basically push water into this one. I'm not going to be using this because I don't have a chip for it, but this is just for experimental purposes. So let's go to the sink and try to push some ink back into this thing. Okay, I'm going to first show you a cart for the I do believe this is for the 4880 because it's a vivid light magenta. It's a 110 ml, not pressurized. And I'm just going to go ahead and pick up some water. And I'm just going to pop it right in. And you can see that I'm able to inject water quite readily, as well as remove it. Removing it is not an issue. In fact, that's how I harvest my ink when I buy these large format carts on sale by people on eBay. Okay, so that's that one. Now, here we have a pressurized model, and I really truthfully forget for what printer this is for. I know it's just a large format printer. I just don't know for which one. Some of these larger EPSON printers give you the option of various different size carts that can be installed. This one, no go. I cannot inject water at all. I can pull out material, but I cannot inject anything. In fact, there's a little remnant of ink still left. Nothing I could really use. Okay, so now let's go ahead and test an modified 3800 cart. There's this one here, still all dirty and everything. Let's see if there's any ink left in it. I doubt that there will be ink left in it. Yep, totally dry. And when we try to inject water, we should fail. And I cannot get any, not even a drop of fluid inside there. Alright, so this one needs to be modified. Let's go ahead and check the one we just finished doing the modification to reach the one-way system. I'll pull some. Now, I wish I had a priming tip. That would be a lot easier. Now, let's see. Okay, see? I can definitely pull ink or push ink into the bag. Awesome. Okay, so make sure I do not inject air in there, because I'm going to, at the end, I'm going to pull out any air that may be. So that's 10 ml. And we'll see how much ink capacity this bag really holds. They claim 80, but even with refillable carts, you cannot put in any more than 70 in most cases. There's 30. 40. As long as I did not puncture that bag while I was drilling, I should be able to inject and also pressurize the system. And I'll show you how I do that outside of the printer. Now when I feel the plunger push back against me, I'll know the bag is full, and I'll draw back a little bit so that it's not overfilled. Now, back in the day, there were some refillable systems. I think it was Inject-Fly had a great set of carts. I don't know what happened to them, but they also operated with an internal Mylar bag, and I just do not know for the life of me why in the world would third-party cart makers not utilize that internal bag. If it's something to do with a violation of patents or anything like that, I can understand, but really this is the ideal way to go. And as you can see, if you look at my plunger, I push in and it pushes back out on me. So that means I have reached the equilibrium. This is the maximum ink. And I'm going to now pull back just a little bit. I'm going to hold it upright, make sure all the air is to the surface, and I'm going to pull back just a hair. I got solid colored water, and I'm going to pressurize the system. And just leave it pressurized underwater to see what happens. I'll be back when this is filled up enough. Okay, as you can see, I have my filled cart floating. It's floating because there's air still in the internal compartment that the printer pressure pump uses to create a positive pressure atmosphere that can bear against the ink bladder. I'm going to insert a piece of tubing. This is just fuel line for model airplanes. And with the syringe, and I wish I had a larger syringe, but I don't, I'm going to begin to insert some air into the internal compartment. And so you can see that the syringe is being pushed back. Now, believe me, the printer does not operate under a great deal of pressure, but I'm going to actually put in like 3 syringefuls of air, and I'm going to pinch the hose so the air does not escape. You don't see bubbles coming out. And I will insert another, or inject another 3 syringes full of air. And you can see now that I've created quite a positive pressure inside there. So this is excess of what the printer would actually create. And now I cannot. I mean, that's all the pressure I can muster. So I'm going to hold it down like that, keep the plunger from popping off the syringe because it really wants to. And I'm going to hold it under the water, and I'm going to look for bubbles. I'm going to look for anything that tells me that something bad is happening. I really don't know what else to check to determine whether the difference in the carts that do not have a pressurizing system and the carts that do. Why, coincidentally, the ones that are not pressurized have one-way valves. I would not think Epson would be that stupid to, produce a cart, especially for a fairly modern, printer within the last, 5 or 6 years, that would allow the end user, to refill to their heart's content. And not only that, but heck, a resetter is available for those larger carts I showed you. Then all of a sudden, a pressurized cart is developed for basically an upgraded model of that printer. Why did they go to a pressurizing system? I have no clue. Maybe to provide better ink flow. And then why are those particular carts now installed with a one-way valve? Is the one-way valve necessary? Now you don't see ink. I am applying 3 times the pressure the printer would apply. That little plunger that I showed you earlier is pressing against that rubber seal, which is held together by that little snap-on ring. You would see, I'm pushing on the plunger here on purpose, you would see magenta color coming out of that right now. So this is while being pressurized. If I stick a pin and depress that plunger, magenta water will pour out, because the pressure that I have built outside the bag would force the ink, if that was ink, right out. But it is sealing, and if I then remove this and allow it to depressurize, basically nothing happens. So I am at a loss as to why. Maybe it's just a total coincidence in the way Epson designs have evolved. But now all I need to do is have the resetter come in so that I can test it to make sure that it can reset those chips. If it does not, then all of this was really for no reason. Only to prove that I could turn these OEM carts into refillable carts, if anything at all. Which is a bit of a triumph, if you can look at it that way. Always a silver lining to everything. Okay, so I will be back when I receive my resetter. And keep your fingers crossed, I assure I am as well. Bye-bye.